Thank you, Anita, and good evening. I don't know about you guys. I'm quite exhausted. Okay. Um, so I was having a discussion with our panelists and just showed them the kind of questions that some of you wanted answered. That was running into pages. Okay. So what I'm going to do is to pick and use the moderator's privilege and pick a few questions, and hopefully we'll get time for as many questions plus some live questions from you all. You already know the eminent panel, except you haven't met Rodrigo. So I'll ask him to introduce himself briefly.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Rodrigo Gonzalez. I'm the CEO of Clarive Software. We're a company based in Spain, doing application release automation for various clients across Europe and the Americas. So, but I'll give you guys my brief biography. I'm originally from Brazil. I'm a Brazilian citizen. I moved out of Brazil when I was 17. I went to the States to study at a university that's been around today and yesterday. It's a Texas Tech University, so it was a big coincidence that we are both lived in Lubbock or living in Lubbock, which is where Texas Tech is based. So after being in the States and getting my degree in computer science, I started consulting. I've been a consultant most of my life. Most of the consulting I did was to help organizations on automate, dev to ops, because back then, I'm talking 1996, there was no such word as DevOps. And from that experience, I moved throughout the U.S. and then I said, hey, I'm moving to Europe and see what's going on there. Europe was a great experience. I went to many large customers from across the north, Sweden, the Nordic countries, the UK, and then I finally settled in Spain, and I decided to write my own software that would do the stuff that I've been doing for 15 years. And that's when Clarive was born in 2010. So this has been a crazy ride, meeting customers. You get to see, a lot of experience. See people that have misconceptions on DevOps and what to be and what not. And like I had one customer one time say, all the dev people are stupid. Just don't trust the dev people. I was like, man, that's you really need to have, expand your mind a little bit, so you're not going to ever have DevOps here. So they didn't trust the dev people at all. So yeah, many anecdotes from the past. So now, Clarive is about all those experiences and sharing that knowledge in a packaged way, right? So that's what I've been doing. So this is a different life for me since 2010, last 5 years. So anyway, I'll pass you to.
Yeah, thanks, Rodrigo. So you know that we have on the panel eminent educationist, or you can say academic. Brian shared his thoughts and a lot of laws related to that. And then we also have Bala, who has been implementing as a practitioner, and we have a consultant, a coach. So a variety of questions. The first one that I have is, we've been talking about, before that, the scope of this discussion, even though we said cultural myths, it's not only the cultural myths, some of the misunderstandings, culture, which also transcends into other areas in terms of how do we do DevOps, or what is DevOps. Still, I guess, when we said decoding DevOps, there are some questions. A very fundamental question is, we say collaboration is very key, and whereas Dev and Ops were two different words, or two different worlds, we said we'll bring them together as DevOps. But the doubt I have is that we always write it as capital D and a capital O. So while we remove the space between Dev and Ops, why do we still call it DevOps? Okay, do we retain the identity or anything on why it is like that, or does that imply something? Brian?
I don't really have, I don't have an answer. I don't know if that's a good start to the panel or not. I I wish I did, because that kind of stuff, I really like the trivia of the history behind stuff. I mean, I know it's the first movement started kind of with a hashtag, but and we speculated maybe the camel, you know, and camel case, but that's all I got.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. There's something coming out. Go ahead, Vijay.
Shiva's short answer to that is, if you really leave out all those small case letters there, you see the word do. And that's what you want to do, right? So D and O in caps makes it do.
Yeah. Thanks, Vijay.
That's a great way of putting up the things into perspective.
Yeah, a related question is there is a feeling that this whole DevOps movement is a bottom-up movement, okay? Primarily coming from the ops side. Is that something that you would agree with? Bala?
Even though the bottom-up movement is coming because operations are always raising the concerns of and always having a lot of issues associated with the development, but I see the culture is both top-down and bottom-up together. One need to understand bottom-up movement is only creating a kind of an atmosphere and a pressure to realize, but DevOps is such a kind of a culture, it is driven by the business outcomes, and IT need to be seconding that particular thoughts. Unless business support is there from the top down, it's difficult for bottom up to realize. So that's my way of looking at the things. From the cultural context, we have seen some Vishu was putting up the, when he was concluding, he was saying mindset is greater than the tool set. That is indeed the thing when you're trying to really firm up your beliefs and the values. It's really the mindset transformation is required to realize that culture.
Rodrigo, in your coaching consulting assignments, this mindset change, when it happens at the bottom, do you hit a tipping point and then the top changes? Or like Bala was saying, it's a top-down and bottom-up approach. How do you usually approach it?
Yeah, I think it's, once it starts in the bottom, I mean, I don't like the word bottom because it sounds like, you know, lower people, but actually the whole thing is about empowering people to do things, right? It's like the story I said, right? This company thought all developers are stupid, so changing the mindset of the manager that was thinking that, and giving people power to make decisions like, you know, DevOps decisions, like, let's deploy this tonight, this thing is ready, the quality is okay. Once you start doing that, you know, empowerment, people, top management will realize that the people at the bottom, right, are actually more intelligent than what they thought they were, right? Because they don't really have that much consideration. They think they're just herd of, you know, of cows or something, right? You know, so it's very important to change the top management concepts of things, but sometimes the problem is that they're the ones that have to make the decision to say, hey, this organization needs to change. So DevOps movements is a lot about telling managers to realize there's something happening, right, that they need to take care of now. Otherwise, those people are just be unhappy and they're just going to move on, and the business is just going to go downhill.
Okay.
I was just going to say that, you know, the reason why there's that bottom-up emphasis is that if you think of DevOps and the open source movement too, you know, it's the cathedral versus the bazaar, right? So with the open source movement, there's this notion that great ideas come from the bazaar and not the cathedral. That's the whole notion behind the open source movement. And you know, the web too, this notion of, I'm being academic here, but it's the rhizome, it's the web, and you've got ideas coming from all facets of the web. But nothing's changed in the world in the sense that if you want strategically for things to take hold, it's fine for the fire to start at the bottom, but strategically that's not going to be effective. I mean, people bring back ideas all the time. If you want it to be strategic, it's going to have to be operationally something that's more involved than just simply doing it, you know, from the bottom up. There's going to have to be buy-in at some point. That bottom up is going to have to set examples at least that become strategically available for everybody to see for, you know, for adoption's sake. So, I mean, I mentioned it the other day when I was talking too. I don't disagree with the idea of the bottom up because that's kind of philosophically it makes sense. I think about the circle sometimes too. I mean, there's no bottom on a circle. I mean, if we're thinking about DevOps as this constant circle, you know, you're getting ideas from all those different places. I think when you hear that motif over and over again, it's bottom up, it's bottom up. I think in an enterprise setting, that's a lot harder to, you know, make that case.
Yeah, a related question is something that came up, I think, in yesterday's some sessions also, is that we say empowered teams, when we say DevOps, roles are interchangeable. Is that really practical? That means, are we moving away from specialization, away from, when you say architects, can be testers, or testers can be deployment, and how does that work?
Not really. Basically, when we are trying to talk about this particular role change, that is a kind of a myth, I would say, because DevOps is trying to motivate a collaboration culture. When you're trying to bring in that what you're trying to convey the message to, you're working together, the devs, test, and operations are working together for the common goal, common objective, so that they can their intent is to reduce the cost and minimize the risk. So they have a lot of trust between each other, whatever they are trying to achieve that objective, and not creating any hindrances, not creating any blocks to achieve the main goal, what business is really expecting. So to establish this transparency, what they are doing is they are working as a one unit of team, not as a different specialized set of teams. So in that way, the roles are not getting changed. The specialization still holds good, but they are working together in a collaborative manner. That's it.
Brian, you wanted to add something? No? Oh, okay.
Okay.
Rodrigo.
Hey, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, one important thing I think from customers I've visited and I know is that trying to avoid to create heroes within the organization is very good. I think DevOps thing to do. Which is that kind of role you're saying. You know, there's one person that knows how to do a lot of things. It's not bad to know to do a lot of things, but once you have this star people in there, you know, the star programmers, rock stars, they sometimes call them. You have too many rock stars, then people start going to these people to get their problem solved, and then these people become very fundamental for, you know, how things are done. Other people feel kind of like forgotten because, you know, hey, this is the guy, you know, even the customer will say, hey, I want that person, you know, I want that person to solve this problem. I just absolutely hate when, you know, when that happens, because once you have that kind of people in there, you're just creating this, you know, ideally, you just have to be sort of collaboration that looks like a graph star, you know, everybody's talking to everybody. Once you have this one person, everybody's talking to that one person, that another person, you're creating this bottleneck, you're creating this dependency of the business success on those people. If you lose that person, it's going to really impact on your ability to execute. So yeah, I think it's just totally agree with the collaboration.
Yeah, Bala, one thing that you mentioned in terms of collaboration, the benefit is also on the cost part. But what I hear, or a question that I get asked frequently, is, I mean, first of all, this term called DevOps engineer. I said DevOps engineers are expensive. There are so many tools, keep changing. I need to integrate it. It's not just one tool. So my total cost of this DevOps engineer has a significant portion in terms of training. So what's your take on that?
See, my take is basically, I don't see there is any kind of a role exists called as a DevOps engineer. So developer role is there, operations role is there. They are doing it for a particular purpose. One thing happens is now every developer or a tester or operations people are expected to have a cross-skilling aptitude. So they need to complement the skills. So they have an understanding, the secondary skills getting developed. So they have a view what developers are doing. Developers have a view what kind of tools operations are using. So that complementing skills, helping them to drive the functions in the DevOps atmosphere effectively and a more collaborative manner. So what we are trying to do is bridge the gaps and promote the kind of a culture where dev is simplifying the activities of the operations team, and operations are trying to simplify the activities of devs when they find any particular bugs in the production or something of that nature. And dev is trying to automate the scripts which could help them to ease the deployment process and make it faster. The speed of deployment they can really look at. So there is no role called DevOps engineer, according to me. It's really different, but cross-skilling is important.
But when an organization starts on a DevOps journey, So you would not recommend creating a DevOps PMO to monitor this, and you spoke about stages of maturity and all that. Now, who would do this?
See, it's a kind of, again, I would say, when you're trying to talk about, I told in my talk as well, DevOps is a kind of a philosophy which is completely encompasses different beliefs and concepts which one need to understand and take it forward. Now, if you are trying to create different roles for the DevOps, it is really diluting the particular culture. You can still have that kind of same kind of functions, but promote the culture of collaboration that could make a big difference. That is where I'm saying you need to have a mindset transformation and change of mindset, believe in the change, and seeing that there is a value you can derive out of it. Once the team believes and the organization believes, they could really benefit from it. And coming to the tools which you mentioned, because when you're trying to work in that kind of an atmosphere of continuous integration and continuous deployment or the delivery processes and having the continuous feedback, there are definitely a lot amount of tools you need to invest. Now, when you're trying to do that, what is happening is today if you're trying to breaking out your 100% of effort, there is specific efforts you're trying to put it right from the planning to the deployment. But very less amount of effort is going into the innovate the things. But with this automation you're trying to bring in, and what happens is you have a very high scope to optimize the efforts what you're currently spending, and you try to leave out a window for doing the innovation to make the things better for the future. So that is what people should realize at the top level. Utilizing this culture, they can make a big transformation and big way for the future through innovation. So that's what we need to look at.
Okay. Brian, I have a question. Yeah, you spoke of transparency, okay, in the team when you say collaboration and all that. Now, we do see a lot of these teams using, say, visual Kanban boards and things like that, which is more of extrinsic transparency. Yes, it does bring about some amount of transparency in terms of what is happening. But when we are talking about collaboration and teams, team members working together, do you see, or what do you think should be done to increase the intrinsic transparency?
Well, I think there's a lot of things, and some can be tool-based. I mentioned it the other day, just the idea of dashboards that are available for team members to look at, the very active, any sort of verification tools. So there are tool-based, solutions to it, and then, I mentioned, I didn't spend a lot of time on the transparency stuff, but I mean, there's obviously other sorts of things. You could do a wiki within the workplace where people contribute to it. Dell does that quite a bit, I know, in their Austin-based operations. Stand-ups, I mentioned that the other day, but I think that's a way that in an agile environment, everybody comes together and has to address what's going on, and I think that can be done. Having cross-functional teams, the communities of practice idea, again, is that when you're working around a project, I mean, you're trying to break down the silos. So just having all those sorts of activities, people coming together, I think there's a lot of different ways. Ergonomically, right? A lot of the startups who practice DevOps have bullpens. They've gone back to the old bullpen idea in terms of how they do stuff. And physically, if everybody's a team, you don't have rooms or cubicles. You're literally in one space. Now, that's more difficult in a virtual environment, but there are ways you can kind of break down those walls too. So I think it depends a lot on the culture of the organization, but I think there's just there's quite a few things you can do from a tool-based perspective as well as a cultural perspective to start to promote this transparency. And one last thing I'd say is be honest about, be okay with, and accept failure and not blame. You hear that a lot, and what does that mean? But I mean, there is that thing that happens in our world of high tech when we're doing stuff that we have a tendency when things go wrong is that you're looking for people to say, well, this is what happened or this thing. And I think teams do a good job of accepting failure and trying to figure out ways to own that. And in owning that and spreading that around, I think that's significant, in terms of creating transparency eventually so everybody can see where they fit and how it all flows together.
Yeah, that's interesting because Rodrigo, the dynamic visualization demo that I saw, that you were showing,
Sure.
I think probably touches upon some of the aspects that Brian mentioned in terms of being able to visualize the flow of work and all that.
Yes.
So in your coaching or the thought behind creating something like that, How could that help in understanding, let's say,
Yes.
the interpersonal team member communication dynamics?
Yes, yeah, like what Brian was saying, technology is the enabler of all this, transparency. That's why DevOps is also about the tools, not just about culture, yeah, because you need technology. I mean, there's technology that makes things faster, but then there's technology that makes things better, right? And having that kind of technology, that visualization is one of the ideas we had with Clarive, is to see real time how people are communicating, who's working there. That I don't know if you guys been by the booth, but you see that. But it's just you just see how people move around and go to different departments and do different activities. Like you can see how people are maybe switching too much context or detect patterns that you cannot see normally in data or with graphs, and there's things that just the brain is able to detect, right? Your eye. So I think, yeah, technology is a great enabler of all the transparency that you need to really get DevOps working in your organization. But then there's really simple things that you can do, like one technique that's really working and it's really effective is to have coffee breaks that have everybody go on a coffee break. Everybody in the team go together, yeah. Make the coffee breaks, maybe one team or random. Just get random people. It's like a lottery. You get every day an email, and you get you've been selected for this coffee break at this place, and just have people talking. You can talk about cricket or whatever. It's not a hackathon kind of thing. Don't think DevOps. Just just sharing space, and people will just there's an MIT research now that's just great from the MIT Media Lab, and just say team success is more based on the ability to collaborate within the team, exchange things within the team, and with another teams, then has to do with every individual curriculum or capacity of every person. So teams with very capacitated people, very good people, full of rock stars, perform worse than teams that just have average people, but they collaborate a lot and that investigate a lot. They leave the team, and it's sort of like the visualization we saw. We have the team, and then you have this person just moving out of the team, going to another team, ask some question, go back, bring that information there. And if you think about it, it's just like, that's how humanity evolved, right? From the cave, and then people start coming together into cities and building places where they can communicate. So this simple exercise, people that go out on breaks together or just having lunch tables that are large, in your organizations. It's simple things that you can do. You don't have to, make a big consultant company come and tell you what DevOps has to be. Just put a bigger lunch tables where a lot of people have to sit together, and you just see how the mood is going to improve, and then productivity, and you have a better customer, happier customer at the end.
Yeah, see, all this sounds good and also very exciting, saying that teams figure out, they dynamically adjust and everything else. But let's say for the non-web scale companies or the non-startups or the more traditional enterprises, where you need to have goals, measurable targets set. So do you think setting targets for DevOps maturity, even in your staged model or whatever, is that going to be counterproductive?
Excellent question, difficult to answer. In my view, the goals are inevitable. You can't change. But only the thing is, if you are trying to bring this kind of a change and associate a fun with that particular change, I feel that teams can gain larger productivity and make the things happen faster, quicker. You already listened to some of the key performance indicators in the past sessions, the speed of deployment, the number of rollbacks you're trying to do, and how fast you are able to meet the customer objectives. All the any kind of launches you want to do with a zero-day delivery. All these things could be the metrics where you can try to track when you're trying to bring in that kind of an atmosphere. And what Rodrigo say about putting up the kind of a lunch tables, big lunch tables to come together. So basically you're trying to create that kind of an atmosphere that team are able to freely talk to each other, collaborate with each other. And when they have that kind of a trust within each other, then the goals really doesn't matter individually. What matters is the organization objective and the business outcomes. When they get that and when they celebrate that particular milestone, that gives a higher level of satisfaction. That's what yesterday also we have seen in the closed circuit, that job satisfaction gets improved. If that is achieved, really goals and bands doesn't matter.
That's interesting, because follow on to what Rodrigo also said in this is, yeah, all these are concepts that are nice. And what someone was asking me was that now if we have to digest all this, now one is there's so much of jargon, there is so much of technology, there is so much of agility, connect with business and everything else. Now to actually internalize it within our organization or our project, we want some good coaches. But it looks like when we do all this, whether it is internal to the organization or external, I think DevOps coaches are yet to be born. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I usually don't go to the gym or anything like that, so I don't know how it is to work with a coach.
In your consulting, when you play the role of a coach,
yes, I really think I don't know the answer. I'm gonna take the I think the best way to think about coaches is to not think about them as coaches, right? So just have a good coach will actually have the team will shine. When you see a team like on a football team, right? When the coach is more important than the team, there's something wrong with that, right? So my take is that DevOps coaches, if you approached by someone that claims to be a DevOps coach, and it feels like he's a star, or he or she is a star person that wants, I'm going to change your organization, make a lot of promises, something is not right? I mean, I think DevOps is the kind of thing that you really have to rely with, is a set of ideas that you're going to implement, and it's not about having inspirational people, because that will create a dependency, and then instead of having information sharing and people learning how to work together, what you're going to have is sort of like guru person that's going to be your go-to point for every decision as far as how the organization needs to be set up. So I'm not sure if it's good to have a DevOps coach as such, right?
Good. So we've killed DevOps engineer, and we've killed the DevOps coach. So let's see who else. So I think that's good, because ultimately what will remain is the team. Okay? And the team needs to realize that. So Brian, here, you're talking about multi-skilling and all that. You spoke about all that. And there was one interesting slide in your presentation about riding two horses. And I guess the choice of the color of the horses was also intentional. They're not the same. Yeah, one was black and the other was white. So does that signify Dev and Ops? And then you need to ride both the horses. So what would be your suggestion in terms of approach? I mean, how do you, first of all, mount the horses?
I don't know. I don't know how that guy got up on that horse and then got on the other one. Somebody probably lifted him up there. And how did he get down?
On a more serious thing, see, the biggest challenge that seems to be there is, you talk about Agile, you talk about Kanban, you talk about how you can bring in all those processes, but the inherent cadence on the dev side and the cadence on the ops side are different. I mean, essentially, the way my takeaway from that slide was that if I need to do that, now how do I kind of match that impedance?
Right, or if it's such an aberration that it's going to be the case that you're going to see people riding horses, just one, most of the time in Texas we say behinds, but on their bottoms, as opposed to riding two horses at the same time. So even if you can do it, that's probably not a model you want to follow over and over again. I mean, there's all sorts of things going around in that picture, right? The other thing is, you could assume, too, that somebody is claiming that they can do dev and ops at the same time. Or to do dev and ops, you have to have somebody who magically can manage to ride two horses at the same time. So there's a lot of different things. Actually, the story behind that is I almost went with the, have you seen the one where it's the DevOps unicorn? Mm-hmm. And then the next slide is, I saw this at a conference once, so the next slide then is of a rhino. And then the slide says, everybody thinks that you can't find a DevOps person because it's a unicorn, and then the next slide is a rhino, and says, see, rhinos really do exist, it's just that they're a lot fatter and uglier than what we thought they were. So, I mean, I think there's, even if you can do it and ride the two horses at the same time, I'm not sure that's necessarily the point of why you go about doing all this, is that it might be better to approach it from a different perspective, right? And try not to, as we've just alluded to, find one person who can magically deliver all this stuff to you. It is a methodology. In that sense, it's about the team and trying to find ways. You know, it's interesting. If your organization is an organization, though, that needs agents of change, it depends on the culture of your organization. If you're an enterprise, if you're a startup again, everybody gets together and decides it's really cool and we're going to do DevOps. If you're an enterprise organization where the nature of your organization is such that the governance is set up so that it requires agents of change, then that's probably going to be necessary for DevOps to come along, because that's just the nature of the organization. You just can't all of a sudden change everything. But you know, it's about trying to find different ways to, you know, put that in and make that work. So yeah, I think there's something to that slide to suggest that even if you can do it, there's questions about how you got on and questions about how you're going to get off, you know, metaphorically. So.
Bala, you spoke about 4 C's in your presentation. So one thing, we also spoke about whether it's a bottom-up initiative and so on. A related comment or doubt that most of us have is that senior leadership doesn't understand DevOps. In the sense, we talk too much of technology, but how do you get the connect to business and articulate that value, which goes to also, you know, having metrics and ROI and those kinds of questions. So the question is, what have you seen as the biggest inhibitor for managers to let go, experiment, probably, as Brian said, you know, accept failure?
The biggest inhibitor is the people's perceptions, always. Now, the management, whether they believe it or not, it all depends upon the kind of a mindset of the person who is trying to listen out to what bottom-up is trying to convey the message. If operations are saying that this kind of a change on culture is good, and they come out with an examples and a kind of a value metrics which help them to demonstrate the value. We have seen in one of the session in the Siemens session also, that how they have convinced their management by demonstrating the value. Now, in spite of demonstrating the value, there is always a possibility that management still keeps it on hold. They want to see the results multiple times before they see and trust. There are certain managers who are ready to experiment. They are open-minded. If that is a kind of a management style exists in your organization, it's easy to convince and adopt the DevOps culture or the philosophy. If the management is conservative in nature, they would like to see the repetition. So that's where I was trying to convey the different stages, where you are trying to put in the process of repeatable processes and also have the metrics and dashboards to demonstrate consistently how these particular changes can add value. And once they see that particular value, it's easy for senior management to take that direction. However, its top-down is only looks into the kind of a results on a consistent basis. If the results bottom-up shows up, then they are convinced. However, the biggest inhibitor, as I rightly said, it's perception. Changing perception of a person is not easy. It depends on the context and the situations you are trying to deal with. In spite of you bring out all the kind of values, if you are, in spite of bringing all the kind of ROIs, they can keep still on hold because they are carrying that kind of a perception. Now, I was trying to give out one interesting analogy here. There was a small message which came to me in the WhatsApp. What it was showing me is about an escalator and steps. And people who are coming to the escalator, they all need to go up. They were all taking the escalator route. Almost like a 95% were taking that. Now, what a group of people they did is they removed all the steps, placed their musical instruments, and laid down the steps in such a way that when you step in, it resonates and sounds music. The change in culture there, now once a person saw that when I get into the step, it shows you the Sarigamapa and other things, people started getting into the stairs and there was an immense change that 95% of the people now taking the steps rather than the escalator. So you have created a fun and the culture got changed and people started utilizing the steps. So similar kind of a culture behavior change we can bring in when you see the fun and people start adopting it.
That's very interesting. Rodrigo, in your consulting, have you come across any such situations of leadership understanding and accepting this, or trying to, or be willing to experiment, and anything that you've done, fun things with teams?
All right. Yeah, I met good and bad leadership. So it's hard sometimes. Leadership, even though they're bad, if they at least empower people to make changes, and say, hey, like that manager that I mentioned, that she said, all the developers were stupid, right? But she actually drove an empowerment change in the company that made those developers deploy automatically to production. So she actually transferred the knowledge of deploying back to dev, even though she called them stupid. But she actually put a lot of quality gates in between. She put calendaring to make sure that deployments occurred at certain times, a lot of quality checks that were happening. So at the end result was that, I don't know if she ever changed her mind about developers, but at least developers are actually, they reduce the release cycle, and people start seeing the benefits of having such an arrangement. So yeah, sometimes people, they won't change, but at least the organization does. So, but if you want an anecdote, from that visualization thing I was telling, there was a situation that, we start going with this customer. We were observing how the patterns in development were going. So this thing that we have in our tool is that you see how a person goes to an application and makes some changes in the application, and then the little guy will just fly over to another application, and you see how it makes the changes here, and then make its change there. So there's this one person that would go to another application, make changes here, and then you see how like two people come flying from behind, and then have to fix something that he did, and they fly to another application and make a change, and then you see how two people again or three would just go behind and have to fix it. Okay, so you know what they did there, the customer? They promoted him to a manager. So he's manager now. So, so he's out of the application, touching the application code.
So that's a career enhancement secret. Okay. Brian, in this, when there are these heroes and rock stars and all that, you spoke about communities of practice. Right? Now, if you look at it at two levels. Now, one is at the project level, sharing the experience from, say, one release to another, or one sprint to the other, or one technology to the other, whatever decision they take. And at an organization level, particularly for consulting or system integration organizations, where there is a need to collate this knowledge across teams, and then you create either virtual communities and so on. What would be your guidance in terms of having communities that are unfettered, that just go do whatever they want, or should it be a governed or a managed community of practice?
Well, I mean, the true definition, and I just suggest that as a model, that most communities of practice are relatively informal, in how they operate. But I suggested it as a model because the idea behind it is that if there's certain fundamental things going on, the knowledge that is learned within the community, and it's learned through practice, which is important. It's transparent, it's tacit, so the community owns it. You know it because you're a part of the community. That's how you get to know it, and that's how knowledge is spread. And really, learning and community are inseparable. You can't say that you've learned something outside of the community. So it's more of a methodology, the idea that might be a better approach, because you're really working to try to work together to try to solve problems, as opposed to, it's just changing the mentality of, don't think that you're supposed to come to work to do this job with these duties. You're supposed to come to work to contribute to the community, to add to the knowledge in there, and to try to get stuff out of it. So in theory, if you created multiple communities of practice that didn't exchange information, then you've just created really cool silos that you already had. So that's not supposed to be the point. It's, if anything, you model a community of practice. You see how it works. But the Boeing example, it's like a big Venn diagram. So in fact, what happens at Boeing, and it happens at other places too, the communities all overlap in some way. There are people within one community. in the U.S., there's this game, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, or 6 Degrees of Separation. So people can claim that everybody has 6 things away from this actor, Kevin Bacon, because they know somebody that knows somebody. The point of community practice, if you're not necessarily in that particular community, there's somebody or there's going to be some activity that will overlap. That's the whole point, is that it shouldn't be in any way like you've got bubbles that aren't connected. There should be overlap within the communities. That should be what happens, and what I suggested was create one to see what happens. Use it as a model. There's transparency in that. It's a good role model, and at some point then you can spin people out of that community to start up, you know. That's right. Yeah, it just kind of, it spheres off.
Okay, I have a lot more questions, but looking at the time, we need some time for the audience also to ask questions. Before that, I just want some thoughts from each one of you in terms of if you were to pick some top 3 considerations, you know, for teams and organizations that are considering DevOps. You know, what should they look at? What should they be, you know, wary of? Rodrigo?
Okay, 3. Let me think. I think it's number 1, just make sure, like I was saying, that people communicate. That's communicate within the groups, within the teams. So make sure, number 1, that they know what each other is doing. Okay. Number 2, that make sure that teams know what other teams are doing. Okay. That's number 2. So have them meet across groups. And have that as something that happens frequently. It doesn't have to be strict. It has to be outside the standard, you know, sprint or review meetings or things like that. Just make sure they meet informally and they just tell, you know, show and tell. You know, that this is, hey, this is something I'm working on. This is a problem I'm having. Just informal kind of thing. And number 3, make sure you empower people to do things. I mean, don't let the hero take over. Don't, you know, if you have a hero, because sometimes you just have the star programmer, somebody that just, you know, was able to deploy to the database, real difficult kind of implementation, and have him show everyone else what he's done, you know, promote that transparency. So empower people and to do things, to be able to make choices, and then have them show everyone else what they're doing.
My take would be the first thing is about believe in the change. The team should whatever the change you are trying to get in, they need to believe in it, and they need to have a change of mindset. That is number 1. Only when they have it, they will be going for the success. The second thing is the team should start believing again on the business outcomes as a first. IT would be the second. Whatever you are trying to achieve, the objective is for the business. And once you show that kind of an attitude, that would dramatically change and get a buy-in from the leadership, what you're trying to achieve. The third and most important thing is culture. You should adopt the culture of trust and transparency. And as long as you are adopting that and practicing it, you'll be able to get DevOps philosophy successfully deployed and move forward.
Well, yeah, I agree with all the things they've said. I mean, I'll go back to what I said the other day. At the core of it, DevOps is about better business is about better products, and better products means better business. I mean, it's a syllogism, right? I mean, it all connects together. The reason why we're doing this is because we recognize that there's a need to change how we're doing things. We recognize there's issues. That's why we show up to these conferences, and this is why we have these tools. It's time for us to evolve, and we recognize that DevOps is an opportunity for us to do things better. And I think that's the emphasis, that's the takeaway for me, is that it's a new way to approach what we recognize as a problem. It's going to evolve. It'd be interesting to see in 2-3 years what we're saying, because I think it's already evolved from the time it started. So, I mean, that's what I would add.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, now we have some time for audience questions.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Navdeep Singh, and I work for Intel. So my question is, like, what would be the if you have a traditional enterprise setup, like where we have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and a lot of numbers for operations team. So what effect the DevOps going to have on it? Is it going to be positive or negative? And what will we do with the events? I mean, things like incident management, event management, problem management. So where DevOps going to sit in this architecture? And I have a second question, more of an opinion. We call DevOps like working with advanced tools, agility, and really riding 2 horses. Like that was awesome. Can we call DevOps nothing but like, same as special ops in army? We have it. That's it.
Can you come back on the last statement? Can you call DevOps?
DevOps in IT is nothing but same as we have a division called special ops in army or something like that.
Special ops in army.
Lighter note. That's it.
Want to go? No, you get the mic.
So first part, I believe you were trying to refer that you have an organization structure of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, how the DevOps fits into this context as part of the architecture.
Yes.
So now today what you are trying to achieve, now let's understand the today's way of working style. Basically when you are trying to get any kind of incident occurred into the system, then you're trying to get to the tier 1 support to see that they're able to fix it. If they're not, they'll try to pass it on to the tier 2 or then on to the tier 3. So this is an operational framework completely where the operations are getting touched first and then the development team comes into the context. Now, because that we are breaking the wall of confusion with the adoption of the DevOps, what happens is like operations has got a greater knowledge whether what part is getting impacted and how it can be fixed. So they will collect the information and provide the details to the appropriate level and escalate it so that it can be fixed. The turnaround time to fix the issues and the incidents and handle the problem management effectively can be improved dramatically with the introduction of DevOps because there is no silos exist within this particular tiers. Today the silos exist, there is a bigger wall. You need to go through the chain of some kind of a bug triad systems or the kind of a window, but with the DevOps introduction, you break that silos.
Okay, so won't it be sensible to put like DevOps in after T1, T2, T3, like if like after like T4 is equivalent to DevOps or something like that? Also, that's what
No, I'm not. I don't encourage you to introduce the additional complexity into the entire system. But existing model still works, but people are able to collaborate with each other more efficiently. So DevOps is not asking you to introduce any additional layers. Okay. DevOps is a philosophy which is saying that you need to establish the culture so they can effectively communicate and collaborate to achieve the common goal what they are intent to do, rather than getting into a lot of inhibitions of saying that this is not my job, pass the buck. Okay. So they all realize there is a problem to be fixed and they work together to fix that problem. They are treated as one team, even though their responsibilities are a little different.
Okay, yeah, sure, thank you.
Yeah, I just like to add that one is DevOps. I think it also came out in some of the presentations that is not a one-size-fits-all. Okay, and then when you talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or support being provided, and you adopt models like ITIL, then something like KDB, okay, is something that let's say the level 2 team will be responsible to create, maintain, update, but the L1 team will be using that. Okay. Now, this is a knowledge that Brian also mentioned in terms of the community of practice, or when we say talking, conversations between dev and ops, is that does this get propagated to the dev so that they can see how they can probably throttle these kinds of defects that come. It could be, there are some standard patterns that people use, like if you move into a self-service model. How do you reduce the number of tickets? How do you kind of engage more, and so on and so forth. So don't look at DevOps as something that you will impose on top of everything that you have today, but look at the basic principles. Is there waste in the way we are doing things? Is there lead time that can be reduced or wait time that can be reduced? And look at what is the best model to look at.
Sure.
Yeah, there's one practice that we introduced to some customers. That was it's not always possible to do it, but it's just open. If you have tools in place, Make sure everybody has read-only access to the things that usually they wouldn't have access to. Give them access to them, but just as read-only. Make sure that special fields and information that are supposed to have, like delicate, sensitive information, is not visible. But just having people see what's going on in the whole organization in those tools. It's just simple. It's most tools, enterprise tools, at least they will have authorization levels that you can just say give read-only access to certain type of entities in the system. That's really fulfilling. People just start surfing around, and they will start seeing tickets from other departments that they're from the other tiers, and they will see, oh, those guys are that's what they're doing. Oh, they're doing the marketing campaign this year, or these guys are working on something else. So just very simple activity, that will have people access to the whole organization. Read-only mode will help you, break down, walls like that.
That's what the transparency is all about.
We had a question there.
I come from a mechanical and metallurgical background. In 2 days, I noticed that IT and core engineering industries have common principles. You have lean application development, you have lean manufacturing, you have QA, we are also QA, and you borrowed Kanban from us. Unfortunately, we have also silos in the form of design, raw material sourcing, then production, then sales. So how will IT advise, core engineering industries to apply DevOps kind of principle?
Okay, I will attempt that with my little exposure to the, the engineering industry. See, there are principles called concurrent engineering. Okay, or when you look at some of these, the lean manufacturing process and so on, you apply. In fact, the lean principles come from, let's say, the Toyota production system. When you have just in time, and then you have coordination across communication. Whatever production planning you do need to be known to your suppliers and so on. So there are things that we have borrowed from the engineering industry. At the same time, recently I was with an organization that won the Excellence Award by CII and Exim Bank, where we find that cross-functional teams, that is procurement, finance, HR, all actually sit together. Okay? It's not that they broke the departments depending on which functions, which product line. They were organized by product lines. I thought the way they were doing was very similar to what we call as the Scrum and other agile principles. So I think there is definitely possibilities for looking at breakthrough kind of improvements or organizational patterns when you look beyond your industry.
Well, I was just going to say, it's just a story. It's not an answer necessarily, but the other job I have is that I run a startup. It's been around for 4 years, so you can't call it that, but we make eye tracking technologies. That includes the hardware. So, one of the first things we did to make our hardware was that we bought a 3D printer, a MakerBot printer, and the reason why we did that, it was ironic. It's true that a lot of the lean stuff from hardware manufacturing has infused into what has been primarily a software-driven DevOps sort of approach, but we took really sort of the DevOps mindset and reapplied it back the other way to the hardware. The advantage of having a rapid prototyping machine was that we could force our engineering team to sort of marry itself to the automation that we wanted to carry out and to the delivery. So it doesn't answer it necessarily, but there are increasingly, and I think this is where the maturity will come in. There's more and more examples of sort of the marrying of the different sorts of approaches. I mean, at some point, what's going to happen, and then I guess we won't have conferences like this anymore. I mean, nobody thinks anymore when they go to work, well, everybody wonders why they're doing it, but I mean, nobody thinks, why do I do the things I do the way I do them? We call it waterfall because it's just to disparage it. I mean, nobody, when they came up with the approach to do the waterfall, said, oh, this is a really bad idea, but I'm going to do it anyway. But we call it a waterfall to make it bad. But I mean, at some point for DevOps to be, we're not going to talk about it anymore. It's just going to be the way that our everybody just does business, right? And that's the point of this, is that we're working out all those things as we go through and the borrowing back and forth.
I thought I saw one more question there. Yeah.
So in DevOps, we definitely see one similarity coming up with Agile as such. If you look at the hype cycle that we are following in DevOps, looks like it's pretty similar to what Agile went through. So there were interest in some of the industries, and they started using. Now you see DevOps being done in interested groups. Then it became a need, and people wanted to do it. Then people started doing it, and it became a failure. And then the natural extension to what happened to Agile was one fine day we have a framework, and then we also have a certification. So do you foresee that happening to DevOps as well, wherein you will have a DevOps framework that I allowed to follow at an enterprise level, scaled DevOps? I'm just giving you some example. And you'll have certifications. Your organization needs to be like CMMI certified, like that, DevOps certified for customers to do business with them. Do you foresee this happening? Or are we saying that DevOps is a natural evolution from Agile itself, so it will not go that route? What's your views?
Okay. On the lighter side, this is something that I like to compare with. Whenever you want a standard, whenever you want this kind of a certification, whenever you want somebody external to assure you that you're doing okay and all that, I think there is a basic gap there. Like I was talking about coaches. So I would like to compare it to an analogy where, take a toothbrush. Everybody wants one, everybody needs one, but nobody wants to use somebody else's. They say, yeah, it's fine, but Agile, but I'm implementing Agile in my environment. It's kind of like Agile. Scaled Agile, yeah, we scale, but then we do things, yeah, we kind of do it ourselves in a way. So that's probably where we will end up, because I don't think you can have one uniform standard, like you say, one DevOps for all won't work. It is not one standard that will work for all.
Just to add to that, if you see, in the industry right now, if you see, a lot of enterprises feel really safe by saying, I practice safe. Because they believe it's a standard, it's a framework, it's tried and tested. So will DevOps end up being like that, is the question. So
I think anything that can be, where the word DevOps can be put in, will be there. So it's one of those, words that, hey, DevOps jobs, DevOps frameworks, DevOps practice, DevOps, and then you have the company, software AG, the DevOps company, they're XML company, so they're going to change that and be the DevOps company. Everywhere you see the word, and they're going to burn it down. So it's very important that each one of you just keep tuned in to the real stuff, and be careful. Just be careful. Those DevOps coaches and people like that will be popping up everywhere. So there's good DevOps stuff, but you're always gonna have those cases, right?
My take would be like, basically when you're trying to talk about DevOps, we have seen that DevOps drives a lot of guiding principles. The guiding principles, when you're trying to impart and deliver the results in a consistent manner, they become best practices. Now, once these best practices results across the organizations and result into the success stories, then becomes a standards which every organization can take and implement with a safe approach. Now, these standards, once they get formed up, I believe there will be organizations or the standard bodies will come together to define that kind of a certification models. I don't know if it will happen or not, but I'm speculating that it is possible. So once that certifications and programs get released, it all depends upon the success of implementing DevOps in various fields of industries and creating the stories. Now, once that obtains, whatever you are trying to envision may happen.
thank you.
So last was Brian? No, okay. Yeah, good. Okay. So let me thank the panel, Brian, Bala, and Rodrigo for the wonderful interactions. There are a lot more questions. We'll probably have conversations over email and share it with the rest of the community. And you've been a wonderful audience, been patient, sitting through almost, it says time's up, okay. Otherwise, I had to invent more questions. Thanks a lot, and all the best in your DevOps journeys. And with that, once again, thanks to the panel.
Thank you.